What's up, everybody? Andrew Cooper here, Alarm Fantasy Football. As you can see, no Howard Bender or John and Pemba. They're still off doing the round ball stuff, but we might get Pemba back with basketball winding down. So stay tuned on that. They'll pop in for sure after the draft. But the good news with that, I get to bring in my friends. Here with me today, Mr. Andrew Hall, one of the first guys. When I get to the expo, that's one of the first things I do. I hit up Hall. I'm like, dude, where are you? Let's link up here. So why not link up now before the NFL draft? Go through some stuff. So Hall, let me ask you, how you doing, brother?
Oh, I'm doing great. Yeah, and you're one of my favorites too. I know last year your wife is some sort of saint to let you out of the
I
house so
know.
soon after having that baby. We were shocked.
I
You
know,
gave her a big
dude.
old high five for us. That was very nice of her to let you out like that.
Yeah, and the thing is, she's a nurse herself. So, that even though it was the first child, she kind of knew the deal, she knew the setup, and she knew the timeline. So she was like, you know what? I'm just gonna be chilling here. She was, already planned to stay with her mom and stuff anyway. So it worked out well that way. So I was able to sneak out. And luckily, the expo this year and hopefully moving forward, not on Lainey's birthday, right? Because it's her
I
birthday
was
ended
gonna
up
ask that.
being,
Yeah, like
yes,
you're able to get out this year. Is there a birthday party? Yep.
the 30th of July is her birthday, and the expo is usually I think
First weekend in August or
first or second
second
weekend of
weekend.
August. So yeah, it's gonna be close some of these weeks, but this year is gonna be good. So yeah. So here's what we're gonna do today. This is what we've been doing on this show, pretty much across the board all spring. Is we're gonna talk about some quick news, and there's not a lot. I want to talk about your process. We always ask the guest what their process is, how we can steal some things from them, and then we're going to get into a segment. We've done the orphan crushing machine, which we take orphan teams and figure out how to spice them up. This week we're going to do the danger zone. The danger zone is where some current players live, where we don't know what's going to happen with the draft, if they're going to get vaporized, if they're going to move to the top and become the starter. So we're going to go through those players and tell you who we're worried about, what we're doing with them, whether we're buying them, holding them, selling them. Because right now it's the kind of window where people are excited about the draft. They want more picks. You can make trades. You can move guys around. So that's what we're doing now. Then next week we're going to really hammer down our final, rankings before the draft, and then after we have Thor Nystrom on to break it all down. So, thank you guys for hanging out with us. Let's get into some quick news. There's not much. Devonta Smith extension for the Eagles. Hall, is there even a? That's not really actionable info for us in Dynasty, right? Like that doesn't move the needle as far as like acquiring or trading these guys away.
It doesn't for me, but I know that there are some people that really like to see that and they really like to make sure that the guys that are on their team are signed to longer term deals. I mean, money talks, right? So, like, signing a contract like that means something. I mean, T. Higgins would love that kind of contract, right?
Right.
As I sit here in my Bengals den with my Bengals shirt. But no, like, I think Devonta Smith was probably always going to be, second banana to AJ Brown. I don't think anybody expected him to leave. I don't think anybody had any hints that this was even coming. So for me, it's kind of like, okay, I'm happy about it. I'm not upset, right? Like, I'm not like, it doesn't change anything for me because I tend to play in a 1 or 2 year window anyway, right? So, like, you shouldn't really be planning too far ahead. I don't think this moves him up and down in rankings. I mean, if anything, it's only going to be up, right? But I don't think this really
Right.
changes much from an actionable sense. But others in your league might disagree.
Yeah, and you'd be surprised how many people do play deep for the future, where they're like, I've seen people that are competing now and have a chance to win now, blow their roster up, and in their mind, they're like, "Oh, we're gonna win. I'm gonna win 3 out of 4 years
Yeah,
or 5 years in a row." It's not how it works. It
bold
really
move.
isn't how it works.
Yeah.
Like put your name on the trophy and the money in your pocket now, right? Because you
Bingo.
never even know. Like I've had plenty of these leagues just shut down. You know what I mean? So
Or you
these
might have a kid and decide I don't have time anymore, right? I've had other friends of mine actually that have left or have taken steps back because they're like, I'm a dad now, I'm busy, you get it, right? Like, so that's what I'm
exactly.
saying. Like, there's a whole bunch of things that happen in the world. You don't know what next year is going to be like, let alone 3 years.
100%, dude. And I will say this just to get it out there. If you are one of the people that likes to build for the future and you want to play that game where you're going to, push things out and try and win 5 years from now and trade everything for picks, which is a viable strategy, right? The place to honestly do that is to go to a site like FFPC, myffpc.com. And if you use promo code COOP, they'll give you 25 bucks when you deposit 35 or more. The beautiful thing about those leagues is that they never shut down. If
Right.
someone wants to leave the league, then that team becomes an orphan team and they sell it off, even if they have to sell it for $1 and they fill that spot and the league carries on. According to Eric Bachman over at FFPC, a league has never shut down. A dynasty league has never shut down over there. So you can hit the QR code here, click the link in the description, use promo code COOP. When you're a first-time depositor, they'll give you $25 when you deposit 35 or more. That is a spot where you don't have to worry about all your buddies being like, I don't want to do this anymore. You can really so get that set up. Go check that out now. But anyway, Devonta Smith side, the other news, I will say this, just to add one thing on the Devonta Smith thing, it is good for Jalen Hurts, right? Because
Oh, sure. Yeah.
you want the weapons there. Like, you don't want a situation like what just happened with Justin Herbert, where he lost all his weapons. You don't want a situation with Brock Purdy or Joe Burrow, where Joe Burrow could lose T. Higgins and Tyler Boyd. Brandon Ayuk's trying to shoot his way out of town. That's bad news, man. Like Ryan Tannehill, when he lost A.J. Brown, for a period there, Tannehill was in the QB1 range. He had 3 QB1 seasons, running the ball and throwing it to A.J. Brown. Once he lost that weapon, it was pretty ugly. So you do want these guys locked up long term, but there's not really a way to action that. The only other real fantasy relevant news: Royce Freeman signing with the Cowboys. Are you running out to grab Royce Freeman in your leagues, Andrew?
Short answer, no. Long answer, it depends, right? Like running backs are the one position that I do tend to be a little bit more reactionary to, only because they're easily replaceable in a sense, or they're easily findable on the waivers, I guess, and all of that. So again, like I'd much rather roster on a 28-person roster. I'd rather have 20 running backs than any other position, right? You just never know what the way injuries are. So there is some value in that. But again, short answer being no, because I just don't see it happening. I still think that the Cowboys are going to be drafting somebody, hell, maybe even 2 running backs in this draft to go along with Rico Dowdle. I mean, I just don't see this being a Royce Freeman anything. However, if you currently have him or picked him up on waivers, and as we get closer to the draft, you start sending out, 4th-round picks for him, trying to get a 4th in exchange, I'd be happy to do that. So if no one else has him, it might not be the worst idea to stash him just in case, drop somebody like a Latavius Murray or Leonard Fournette. I just saw get dropped in the league, right? Like Tom Brady is still on some rosters. Like some of those guys that you're holding out hope for, like it might be time to move on that. And I'd probably rather have Royce than them. So it depends on your league.
And there are leagues of every depth. You know what I mean? So his value goes, the fact that his value was 0.0 repeating and now might be 0.00001 means that somebody out there is excited about this information. And, good for Royce. He keeps getting these jobs, and he's a good pass blocker. Keep that in mind, that is what he does well. And it's how he carved out a role when he was with Philip Lindsay, and it's how he keeps getting these jobs, is that at the end of the day, if everything goes badly, they at least have a guy they can put back there and know that he can prevent Dak Prescott from getting absolutely bad. So that's it for news. Well, I want to ask you a couple quick questions on your process, and then we'll get into the danger zone. Right into the danger zone. You think that's good enough to get picked up by the copyright guys over at?
I don't. You know what? I don't want to hurt your feelings, but no, I don't think.
I know I'd rather it hurt my feelings than hurt my wallet. So I think
there you go. I think you're okay.
Danger zone. Yeah. No, we'll be all right. So, all right, with your process, this is the first question I've been asking everybody on the show, and now we're getting closer to where things consolidate, right? What I've been asking people is, what's your calendar like? Because all during the fall, we're all just doing football. It's like you can do college, you can do NFL, but we're doing football. Once the season ends, everybody goes in different directions. Some people take a break. Some people start looking at rookies. I start looking at free agency. People start looking at salary cap, like Anand Nanduri tells us that he just like digs into the salaries and everything and starts figuring it out from there. So for you, once the season ends, like how do you pick up the pieces and what's your calendar like leading from the end of the season till the draft?
That's a great question. And I think the easiest way to put it is it changes every year. It depends a lot on how busy my season has been. The past few years, I've been writing for DynastyPros, putting out content, doing podcasts, that kind of stuff. That all adds up. And I've been taking on more leagues, which I'm now trimming back finally because I found my limit. I hit it. And I think it was just too much for me. So for this year, for the month of January, I pretty much took the whole month off. I didn't send any trade offers. I didn't do any research. Like I just took time to let my brain reset, which I think everybody should do. But the busier you get, the more you need that break. And the same goes true for work and everything else. Like life, our brains work better when they're fresh. And sometimes you just need to go take a walk. Well, for me, that was pretty much the whole month of January, getting stuff put back together. I got the new year, it was weather and all these other things going on, right? But then usually around the Super Bowl is when things kind of heat back up for me. And, after that game, I'm like, okay, the season's officially over. and I think I'm a lot like you. I think you said free agency. I tend to focus a lot more on free agency than I do on rookies. I tend to look at that and be like, all right, who's going to go get what? Who needs what players are available? Because I just feel like the known assets are usually overlooked a little bit more in a lot of my leagues, or draft and rookie fever and all this. Like, everybody's excited about who's going to be the 106. Like, I could care less. Like, who's going to be the new receiver that's signed in Atlanta? Like, that's going to be a lot more meaningful and could be a little bit cheaper and be a lot more beneficial. So I'm kind of worried about the free agency and a lot of the things that come and go with that, and kind of making that my thing. And then usually what I do is the month of the draft is I start listening to smart people again, right? And I start saying, well, who do these people like? Who are the people I trust? And like Matt Waldman's and Zach Reed's and the Dynasty Dummies and, Travis May and like all these other guys. Like, there's a bunch of guys out there. I can't even list them all. Howard Bender's another good one I love too. Like, you guys at Fantasy Alarm have a lot of great content, right? And obviously the tight end whisperer himself, you're the guy I go to for tight ends, right? So like, I try to just digest as much of that information as I can on the rookies. And then when we get to draft day, I tend to put a lot of that knowledge together and then say, where's the draft capital? Where are we going? Because in my mind, draft capital matters a lot. I'm not going to say it matters the most per se, but it depends on the position. But a first round receiver is going to be very different than a third round running back. They're both going to be very highly valued assets, but I might prefer the third round running back because he's the second running back taken over the first round receiver, but he's the eighth one taken, right? So like, you kind of have to put it all in context. So I usually don't do too much comping or anything like that. I don't do a whole lot of film grinding. I don't watch hours and hours and hours of film. Like, I kind of see what I can on the highlights and watch people that are better than me at digesting it. And then I go into the draft and just kind of wait to see how it falls, because again, draft capital and landing spot are huge for me.
Huge.
And we're going to be talking a lot about landing spot later. So that's exactly what we're talking about here.
Yeah, I do something very similar with, I kind of group the players, right? I group the players based on profile, and I do watch them. Like, you have, especially with tight end, you have to watch some, and I'm more of a statistics guy, but you have to watch to see who's making difference, making plays versus who's just like benefiting from play action screens and things like that at the very least. But yeah, I mean, I'm with you that like, I just absorb info now, and then when the draft hits, we can piece it all together and look at the narrative, who traded up, who didn't, who passed on guys when they had a need, things like that. So I'm with you on that. And I guess that kind of answers the question that I was just going to ask of, how do you get an advantage? And it seems like that is the case. So the next thing I'll ask you before we get into the danger zone, which I want to do a lot of talking about this.
Yeah.
What's, just to put in context the discussion we're going to have here, what I like to ask people before we get to the content segment here is, what's the format that lives in your head? For some people, I ask them, and they when they play Dynasty, they just have one league and it's one QB and it's half PPR, and that's always how they're thinking. For you, what's the format that is kind of your default? When somebody asks you a question about a player, you immediately think, okay, this is my default format, because it really does matter, especially in terms of quarterbacks, right?
Yeah, and as someone who does a lot of trading with Dynasty Junkies, like, we're always talking about trades and values and getting making your roster better and making moves that make sense. So for me, format is the number one thing in deciding value, right? Like, for me though, the default is always going to be Superflex now. I used to be a one QB truther, and I've kind of come around. It's got to be Superflex. I think 12 teams is still pretty standard. I definitely prefer 12 team. I like PPR. I like a half point tight end premium on top of that PPR. So you get like one and then a extra half for the tight ends. I like the start 10s where you're not starting 11 and 12, where you have some depth. My personal favorite, not to say that it's what I think of, but my personal favorite is where it's like one quarterback, one running back, one receiver, one tight end, 5 flex and a super flex, where you have a little bit of flexibility, those ultra flex leagues. I like that a lot. But when I'm generally thinking, it's probably the 2 and 2 or 2 and 3, even 2 running back, 3 receiver. And that obviously forces some different valuations to change because you need to start 3 receivers. I'm in 1-2 tight end league, which you would love probably as a tight end whisperer.
I do love those.
And it's enjoyable, but it's also kind of crazy and a little bit frustrating because it's so different than everything else. But yeah, I mean, I'm almost always 12 team, super flex, PPR, tight end premium, and the rest of it's kind of a wash from there. So yeah.
I love those 2 tight end ones. And the funny thing is, when I get in them, people go crazy drafting tight ends, and they're shocked to see how far I wait on them. But I just put it all together. Like, my tight ends in
you got the yin and yang, man. That's right.
The yin and yang, dude. Like, drafted one of them in startup. I drafted Evan Engram right when he went to the Jaguars. Like, I was waiting on guys, and we figure it out, and these guys come out of the woodwork. But enough about that. And I just want to point out, Hal in the chat says IDP Superflex Dynasty. I've been talking with Hal about one of his leagues, man. It is insanity. Hal, in the chat, tell us how many roster spots you have in that league, because I was looking at it and it looked like a CVS receipt. When he sent me the picture, it's like the names are like this small. That's how many teams are on that. Let us know who's in that squad, because that is a crazy one. But anyway, let's get into the danger zone. Here's what we're going to do here is we're going to try and look around, because we've been talking about, with all the guests we have on, the different kinds of prospects, what they do, where they could go in the draft. Now we're going to talk about the potential fallout. And this honestly is huge. You look around at anytime you add a Marvin Harrison Jr., that's going to displace somebody. Those targets have to go somewhere. It's going to redistribute targets. We're going to talk about who is in the danger zone right now, who maybe we're buying because other people think they're in the danger zone, but they might be safe, things like that. So let me go through. We'll start with quarterback, and we'll start at the very top, right? Like, we know the Bears are taking a quarterback, so that doesn't matter, right? And they already traded Justin Fields. Doesn't matter, right? With Washington, we're confident. I think the place to start is the Patriots, right? And they went out and got Jacoby Brissett. This is a guy familiar with the organization, also familiar with Alex Van Pelt from the Browns. So for you, Jacoby Brissett, let's say on a scale of 1 to 10, what do you think with 10 being he's absolutely getting replaced, 1 being not concerned at all, where would you put Brissett in terms of the danger zone?
Probably a 9, but at the same time, I'm the thing that worries me about New England isn't necessarily who the quarterback is. It's the whole team is going to be a teardown rebuild. So for me, while it is a 9 that he's being replaced, I'm not sure that it's happening in this season. We have seen this before where quarterbacks get drafted and sit a little while. I mean, I don't know if that's what they're going to do there, but with the way this team is set up, it reminds me a lot of the Panthers last year with Bryce Young, right? And they threw him in there, and it just did not go well, and it shattered his confidence. And there is some value on both sides, right? Getting some reps is good, but if they're bad reps, is that good? So I wouldn't be entirely shocked if Jacoby Brissett is like quarterback 28 in Superflex this season. You know what I mean? Like one of those guys that doesn't really deserve a spot, and at the end of the year, you're looking back going, how did that happen? Well, he started 6 games. Right. He came in mop-up time in 2 other games when they were down by 40 points. Like, I could totally see that happening. So while I think he's being replaced, he's somebody I'm fine targeting in trades.
Ooh, so you think he's more of a hold buy than he is
a hold buy, correct.
Okay, yep. I like that. No, I feel the same way.
Because his price is going to be low because everybody thinks he's just going to be thrown away. And I don't think that's quite true.
And the moment he's named the starter, he will have value. I believe me that he will, if he is named the starter. Now he could, and the thing is, Gardner Minshew, we watched him, and with the same situation last year, people went out and added him, and he ended up being the backup. Lost a lot of short-term value, but then when he got back in there, he earned himself another job. So, not out of the realm of possibility for a guy like Jacoby Brissett to have a bounce back. We've seen Geno Smith, Baker Mayfield, a lot of guys turning around making $70 million out of thin air in this league all of a sudden. So. You never know with a guy like that. The one that's most interesting to me, and again, I will recuse myself from having a take on this because I've been fairly biased, but I want to get your thoughts on Daniel Jones.
Yeah.
Giants have the 6th pick, and of course, he's going to be coming off the injury. So where do you stand on Jones? First, danger rating, 1 to 10 in terms of him getting replaced, 10 being definitely, 1 being it's not happening.
So if you'd asked me this a month ago, I probably would have been like a 3. Yeah, they might, but I think they go receiver. And I just feel like a lot of that smoke coming out of the New York Giants facility and their locker rooms and everything seems to be going more toward quarterback. I wouldn't be shocked if they go quarterback now, where I kind of would have been before. So I'm probably a 7 with Daniel Jones right now. Yeah. I think he's probably the biggest sell for me because I think you can still get good value for him. For me, a sell has to be somebody you can actually get something you want out of it. It's not just trading to trade or dropping. I'm not going to, obviously I want to sell him. I'm going to get something back. And I think Jones, of this list, I think Jones might have the most value coming back because I think there's still a lot of people that think he is the guy or haven't been seeing a lot of that smoke and haven't been hearing a lot of the news. They might think he's a locked and loaded starter and you don't. And so you're fine getting out of that for what could be another starter, maybe further down the list or a future pick or some other asset you need. So yeah, I'm not exactly excited about Daniel Jones like I was a month or 2 ago. And that says something, doesn't it? Like that's a little bit wild that Daniel Jones might not have a starting job, but he didn't do tons to lose it, but he didn't really need to do much anyway. And he's a confusing confusing asset for me in Dynasty.
Yeah, I'm just not I've never been a fan from an NFL standpoint. Obviously, the rushing or whatever is fine for fantasy, but like, guy hasn't thrown more than 15 touchdown passes since his rookie year. So I just, for me, if I could sell Daniel Jones for anything, I'm doing that. And I'll tell you what, when you consider how important the quarterback position is, I'm always on team. If you don't have a superstar, draft a quarterback. Like, I love what the Cardinals did drafting. They drafted Josh Rosen, turned around next year, drafted Kyler Murray. Like,
Yep.
just keep taking stabs until you hit on a megastar in this league. It's the most important thing, right?
Yep.
Not to mention, quarterbacks drafted in the first round, they hold that value. Like, Josh Rosen was traded for a second. Sam Darnold was traded for a second and change, right? Like,
Because that draft capital still matters down the road.
Matters.
People start
Right.
thinking, oh man, they gave up a first. They must have saw something. Like, ugh, Josh Rosen and even like Sam Darnold, who we're maybe getting into here. Like, there are some names that you're just like scared to start a quarterback in Dynasty, but the NFL's like, sure, come on down. Like, we'll give it a go.
Right. And I think there's a level of ego around this league too, where it's like the girlfriend, like, I can fix him. Right. There's a
Yes,
level of
yes.
ego where the teams think, and Bill Belichick used to do this all the time, where he has his own grades on every player, and every team has their own grades on all these players. And if they become available, their first thought is going to be, oh, it's Cliff King with Josh Rosen. It's Cliff Kingsbury's fault. Right. That it's his fault, and we're good at this, so he'll be good.
The
with
right
that,
coaching.
right?
We do, so we're good. Yep.
Exactly. So there you go. Funny you mentioned Sam Darnold. Also on the list here, the Vikings have picks 11 and 23, but have also come out and said that they are prepared for a world where Sam Darnold is a starter for the team this year. So, and also with some of these guys, you have to factor in into the equation the danger zone. Like, there could be a guy lurking from within, right? The call coming from within the house. So Daniel Jones, factoring into that 7 is Drew Lock. With Sam Darnold, maybe not as heavy, but like Nick Mullen came out and had a couple 300-yard games, so could be a call coming from inside the house for a couple of these players. So Sam Darnold, what's the danger zone on him?
I mean, Sam Darnold to me feels a little more safe than Daniel Jones in a weird way. Like, that's what's so odd about this time of year and the way these picks lined up, right? Had those picks been reversed and the Vikings had number 6,
Right.
those scores would be reversed, right? So for me, the danger zone on Darnold is honestly like a 5. And part of it too is he's a hold. I'm not necessarily trying to buy him or acquire him because I think there's still a lot of potential for him to be the guy, and so you might have to pay for that. But I'm not selling him because there's the potential that he's not, and people may not be willing to pay up. So I'm just fine holding Darnold, and I think a 5 is right kind of in that smack middle zone where I'm like, I don't know what to do with him, so I'm putting him in the middle. But if I'm more confident in Sam Darnold than I am in Daniel Jones, what a wild year we've already got. This is amazing.
Right. This is a spot where you go around, especially even in 1 QB leagues. I look around, and if my league lets me make moves right now, I'm making them. Like, I'll tell you what, I don't care if you have Justin Tucker or whoever. Like, if your league lets you drop your kicker and speculatively hold the player through the draft, then do it. Drop your kicker and grab Sam Darnold right now and see if he's going to be throwing the ball to Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison and TJ Hawkinson and Aaron Jones. Because if he is, even in 1 QB leagues, there's something to be said there. So,
well, and again, not to say that you'll start him or that you need to keep him forever, but just to see that value bump, and you put him in a second for a first, right? Like, you never know what value bumps you can do, and you should definitely be utilizing every possible roster spot that you have, because those roster spots are very valuable, and you should not be having, if you can make moves and can add players. I know in some of my leagues we can't, which is rough. But at the same time, you can still make trades for picks and kind of still get some picks on the board and like kind of put some things together to trade for 2 future thirds, whatever you got to do, get something for assets and move everything you can to kind of prepare yourself. But I'm right there with you. Yeah.
Yeah. Next one up, pick 13. So that's kind of the picks 11, 12, 13 are the Vikings, Broncos, Raiders. I'm not going to talk about Jarrett Stidham right now, but Gardner Minshew. They just paid him money that will make him the starter this year, almost certainly, in my opinion. The 2 years with guaranteed money. But that doesn't stop them from drafting a guy of the future. Also, Aiden O'Connell looked pretty good last year. So 1 to 10 danger zone on Minshew. What do you think?
Minshew's probably a 4 for me, or maybe even a 3, because again, that money talks kind of argument. It was a 2-year deal, I think you said, right? Like, and that's what I heard too. Like, it wasn't just a 1-year veteran minimum. Like, they can cut him with no issue. Like, they signed him to a 2-year.
It's 2 years. It's one of those 2-year deals where
with a 1-year void or something like that.
It's with the amount of guaranteed money, it's like it virtually guarantees he starts this year.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think with the way their pick is, I mean, at 13, you're not. I don't think you're going to be reaching for a Bo Nix or something at 13. You know, like you don't need to go that crazy here, and you're not desperate enough. I think Minshew might do fine, and you actually hit the nail on the head. He's the one that I would be most worried about, maybe from inside the house, in regards to Aiden O'Connell. Like he looked okay last year, so I think that's a legitimate quarterback controversy. I don't think the Raiders need to be going out and making other picks and kind of adding to that drama. I think they're fine just kind of playing with what they have in house, and that's kind of why he's a 3 for me, because I do think he ultimately wins that battle. But that's why it's not a 1, right?
Yeah,
there is still a battle.
It would be a 1 if O'Connell, in my opinion, he earned a chance to compete. That's what it is. He was good enough that in camp they should walk in and say, "Hey, this is a competition." Versus some teams say, "This guy's the starter." They'll say it today. This guy's the starter. I think he's earned that chance to compete. Not that some people will go as far as to say he should start. It's like let them shake it out and then name a starter. I think that's fair for a guy like that.
I agree.
And then the last one I wanted to mention for quarterbacks before we move on to some of the more fun positions is Derek Carr, right? So Derek Carr, as average as it's been, I think he actually oddly only has one QB1 fantasy season in his career, despite being around for a while, throwing to some pretty good names. Derek Carr, the Saints have picked 14. What's the danger of them? What's the danger of them drafting somebody with that pick?
So if I'm being honest and rational and thinking with my brain and kind of going outside, like just putting everything outside my head and just saying, okay, what do we have here? I don't think there's a high likelihood. I think if things stay the same, I don't think they take a quarterback. I think Derek Carr is their guy. That being said, they have a lot of needs. They have a lot of things that they need to get figured out. I think New Orleans is in a really weird spot right now with Derek Carr and with the team, and changing coaches last year I think was a little rough, and they're still trying to figure out who they are, right? So part of me thinks that there's no chance that they make this change. But the other thing is, let's say Penix falls to 14. Or, let's say you see J.J. McCarthy fall to 14. How do they not take somebody there? And that's where my heart kind of like leaps into the conversation, is like we've seen some crazy stuff with teams trading around. I mean, at this current pick, I'm not scared at all of Derek Carr. I think he's going to be the guy. But could we see the Saints trading up to 4? Or trading up to 5, right? And one of those teams that doesn't need a quarterback, and they trade up over the Giants and the Vikings and these other teams that need it to go get their J.J. McCarthy and make sure they lock it in. I wouldn't be shocked, honestly. Like, I'm not saying that they will, and I don't know what the trade package would look like. It's not my spot. But I'm just saying, if you're going to count all of the options, I think Derek Carr should be worried, because it's very clear he's not their quarterback of the future. So for me, he's probably like a 5. Even though I don't think they're going to draft someone at 14, but we've seen crazy things happen, and they might not be at 14. So that all makes me worry.
Exactly. And it doesn't, the hit rates aren't that good, but we've seen teams make moves that confused us that turned out to be great moves, right? Like Bills fans didn't too, but Bills fans didn't want Josh Allen, right? Eagles fans absolutely did not want Jalen Hurts in the second. They wanted a wide receiver for their MVP caliber quarterback that they said would have won the Super Bowl if he didn't get hurt in Carson Wentz, right? Like they did not like that pick. Turned out to be a great pick. So you know what? If the Saints pick somebody there, I'll be very interested in that player. And if they pick, I've got an article coming out on the hit rates on quarterbacks. Any first round quarterback deserves a look, but you got to at some point decide whether you think this is a deep QB class or not, because that at the end of the day, people will always go through and say, oh, you know what, the QB3 or QB4 drafted, we've had Justin Herbert. He was a good QB3 drafted off the board, right? But you have to remember, but every quarterback in that class hit, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. So it's like 2 as a hit for fantasy. Obviously, Joe Burrow was a hit. So it's like, and same thing with like Lamar Jackson, right? Like he hit it as a 5th quarterback, but you had Josh Allen in there. You had other hits in there. It's very rare that a quarterback as the 3rd. In fact, over the last 25 years, there's never been a quarterback that was the 3rd quarterback taken where the first 2 never had a QB1.
Really?
You have to go back to Brett Favre to find the last time a quarterback was taken, the 3rd quarterback off the board, and the first 2 didn't have at least one QB1.
So he was like the best quarterback of the class as the 3rd one off the board.
As the 3rd one off the board. There are times where the third quarterback ended up being the best one.
Right.
Like Jay Cutler, for instance.
Right.
But the quarterbacks some of the. I think Vince Young had a QB1 season as a
Yeah, they still had good seasons ahead of him, right?
Exactly.
It wasn't
So it's
like
like
there was Josh Rosen, and Sam Darnold, so to speak, like in the same draft class. Yeah.
But the fact of the matter is that you want to like if you believe in Michael Penix as the QB5, you're not trying to say he's good and everybody else is bad. What the best way to approach that is say this is just a tremendous draft class because
Yes.
threading that very rare needle is just you're betting on too much. You're doing too much. Do less. Right. So okay.
Do less. I agree.
Do less. Yeah. So let's move on to wide receiver. And let's start at the very top, right? So, and again, the Patriots could take Marvin Harrison Jr. or whoever at 3, but they don't really have anybody to get vaporized anyway. You know what I mean? It's like
Right.
Demario Douglas or Hunter Henry or Kendrick Bourne, they could sneak into that second chair regardless. So I want to move to the Cardinals at 4 because specifically Michael Wilson is a guy that I think is kind of interesting, right? They drafted him fairly high, big bodied split end out of Stanford, but we know Trey McBride is going to get his. He led that. He had double the next highest target getter once Zach Ertz went down on that team. He had 80 something targets from that point, and the next highest was actually I think Greg Dortch because there were injuries and stuff like that. But
Dortch was surprisingly steady because he was there.
Right. So like if you're sitting there with Michael Wilson or Greg Dortch looking at this pick, are you looking to move Michael Wilson now, or are you going to roll those dice? What's the danger zone like on Michael Wilson?
So someone like Michael Wilson and even Greg Dortch to an extent,
and also Trey McBride. We'll throw McBride in there too, because this team, the Cardinals, man, too, they have 6 picks in the top 100, and they also have 104. So like they can take multiple. They could take Joe Alt at 4 if they want, and then take 2 wide receivers.
Well, that's actually what I was even going to say. Like at 4, they have a need, in my opinion, the Cardinals have a need for 2 receivers. No offense to Wilson and Dortch, like I was getting into. I think both of those guys could be receiver 2s, but they're, in my opinion, they're more like fantasy wide receiver 3s, right? They're the kind of guys you're okay to put in your flex, but you're not super excited about it. Injuries have happened, right? Something I know that you always talk about too is the number 1 target getter on the team is going to be Trey McBride. Right. So whoever their wide receiver 1 is already the second target option. And then James Conner is going to get targets too. So for me, it's like, I don't really care who they get. I'm not excited about Wilson and Dortch at all. So I'm fine selling them now. And in the advance that there's some of this hype that they're going to be, neutralized or whatever. Like I already expected that. Like, I'm not worried about that. You know what I mean?
I like Michael Wilson, but I recognize that because of his play style and the type of player he is, he could end up being the next like Damiere Byrd or Demarcus Robinson, where he's a big body, he can beat the jam, he can run block really well, which is going to get you a lot of snaps, but that difficult job sets up all the other guys to make all the catches, right? Like those guys, when you see those guys floating around and you're like, why is Demarcus Robinson getting signed again? Why is Sammy Watkins and Byron Pringle, why are these guys getting signed again? The answer is almost always because they're big, right? And because if you're going to have guys, you can only give so many guys 120 targets. Those guys, at least they can contribute in the run game, the run blocking game. Justin Watson, right? Why does Justin Watson play so many snaps? Because he's a good blocker and because that's half the game, right?
Yeah.
Run blocking. So
which we don't like talking about that in fantasy, right?
I know we don't
get points per block, but it's fair.
Yeah. So that's the problem with Michael Wilson. Let's move on. Pick 5 here, where this one is. I'm really interested to hear your thoughts on this because you've got Josh Palmer, who's kind of the steady Eddie, and then you have Quentin Johnston, who's like the high risk, high reward young fella. So there's a lot of talk about them potentially taking a guy at 5, or maybe they don't. Maybe they go, Harbaugh and Greg Roman, right? Like if they could turn this pick into 7 guards, then they and Blake Corum they would. So what's your first of all, I'm going to make you pick real quick between Josh Palmer and Quentin Johnston, who you would rather have.
Well, as an optimist, I'm going with Quentin Johnston. I just feel like he's still, yes, I get it. He had bricks for hands and he wasn't able to get open and all of these things, but that whole team was, even if he caught the ball, that whole team was not going to do anything. He's a rookie, he's figuring out his feet in the league. He's trying to get all these other things going on. I'm willing to give him a pass in a sense for 1 year. The coaching situation was weird there. We saw how many times did we see the Chargers in primetime just blow it up?
Awful.
It doesn't really matter if a guy can't catch. And so part of me is like, maybe this regime change is what we need there. He was a first-round rookie pick in Dynasty drafts a year ago. I don't know if that's good or bad, but I'm just still saying, like, I don't think that he's trash. So I'd probably, at cost, I'd rather have Quentin Johnston just because that upside is higher. But I think I'm willing to admit that the downside is also lower than Palmer, right? So Palmer's floor is higher. So if you're one of those guys that likes to play for floor at that range of receiver, go for it. But I want all the upside I can get on my bench, and that's Quentin Johnston.
Yeah, I think it boils down to like what your format is. Like if you're in a league like Hal described there, where there's like 75 roster spots and you start 15 players, right? Then a guy like Josh Palmer is going to be in your lineup every week. Whereas like I know a lot of folks that are in like, a hometown 10-team league with, 3 wide receiver spots in a flex where only superstars crack competing rosters. And then you might as well go for broke with Quentin Johnson, even if he is QJ Chark. And that's how it pans out. It's like give yourself a shot at upside. So I'm with you. Let's go Quentin Johnston here. And what do you think the odds are that this team actually does go out and take a wide receiver?
Well, I think that there's whether it's the first round pick or not, there's really no doubt that they're getting a receiver in this draft. And I wouldn't be shocked at all if they go either they trade back or they don't go receiver with their 5th pick. And then they grab a couple in the 2nd and 3rd, and even on day 3, that kind of thing. And they just kind of fill their room with rookies and see who comes out. That being said, if they take a receiver at 5, then obviously Palmer and Johnston both take a hit, just because neither one of them have as much upside, right? Because they're going to be leaning more on the other rookie. But that isn't necessarily a bad thing either. I'm not sure if either Palmer or Johnston are wide receiver 1s for fantasy or for dynasty either way, or even in the NFL. So maybe they both need somebody across the field. The other thing that I'm guessing you're going to want to talk about is the Chargers could really use a tight end.
Oh my God!
There's a
We're
chance
going to get to
Bowers
that.
Goes 5, and that just gets crazy. So I'm just saying, if Bowers goes there, I'm all through the moon with Johnston. Like I just love that because he's going to be on the field all the time, and they're going to be focusing a lot on the Bowers guy. So I don't think that I care really who it is. I think there's only ways to go up from this. And if you end up paying what you think to be a fair price for Johnston now, I don't think you're kicking yourself if that ended up being a bad trade 6 months from now, when we're halfway through the season. It was like, hey, I risked it. I didn't make it. It's fine. You're not having to pay a 1st-round pick for Johnston. So, I'm fine risking like the 208. Why not? Let's just try it out. Maybe you can do it as a part of a package too and have him as a throw-in. Those are the kind of trades I love. So, yeah, that's kind of where my head's at. Is that no matter what, I think both of these guys are going to be good.
You mentioned Brock Bowers, right? So this next one, right? If we're talking about the danger zone and and the scary, I always picture the pilots, right? Like the danger, like the song playing with like Tom Cruise, right?
Oh, and again, perfect for this number 10 pick here too. Right?
If we're talking about that, then this guy is the Iceman of the danger zone.
Yeah,
Mike Williams, the most, injury prone, boom bust, going to a new team. That team also has a 40-year-old quarterback, high risk, and they also have a wide receiver in Garrett Wilson, who's pretty locked in, as locked in as you can get to be in the top dog. What's your danger meter on Mike Williams in terms of them, potentially drafting not just his own issues, but them drafting a Brock Bowers or drafting a wide receiver?
Well, obviously Garrett Wilson is the guy, right? So whoever they're going to be taking is going to be second banana. I don't see them spending that high of a pick on a receiver, but again, Brock Bowers would make perfect sense there. I've seen a number of mock drafts that have him going there, and I just think that would be tremendous for Brock and for Garrett Wilson, and honestly for Mike Williams. Kind of like what I just said for the other, Chargers receivers where Williams just came from. I'm kind of like wheels up on this jet. You know what I mean? Like I'm fine with Mike Williams because again, his cost is almost zero. Like there are places I'm sure you can get him for fab. You know what I mean? Like trade a 4th-round pick for Mike Williams and a 4th-round pick in the future kind of a thing. Like he is almost nothing. He might even be on waivers in shallower leagues, right? But to go back to the point, his upside is right there. Yes, he's injury prone or he has been injury prone, but that's not predictive. Again, former teammate Keenan Allen will attest to this, right? Keenan Allen had 2 or 3 bad years at the beginning of his career where he was labeled injury prone, wasn't able to get it done until he wasn't, and then he played 9 years straight, cranking it out, right? So maybe he just needed a new uniform and a new,
we forget that. We forget all those though, right? Like Julio Jones, dude. People forget that Julio Jones was like the injury machine or whatever, and then he had a bunch of great seasons.
And then he got older and got hurt again, but that's entirely different, right? He was 36 or something when he got hurt. But back to the point though, I think Mike Williams is one of those low risk, high reward kind of guys that I love in Dynasty. So I'm not worried about him losing his role. If anything, I'm worried about them not drafting anyone and him being the number 2 target and getting number 2 target attention. That kind of worries me. So he's one of the few players that I want someone else to join that team in some regard so that he gets better chances to be fantasy relevant.
Right. I'll give you a perfect example. Like let's say Xavier Worthy, let's say a player like that, crazy speed, and we think he can even develop a full route tree. But is he going to show up day one and get more targets than Mike Williams? I don't think so. He's probably just going to be start off as the part-time field stretcher, stretching the field. Yes, and Mike Williams, I mean, he's a buy right now.
Yeah.
Let me throw another one at you. A guy sitting in a wide receiver 2 chair on a team that has done nothing this offseason. Jerry Jones said that they were going to be quote unquote all in, and then they've done nothing. So let's say you're sitting there and you have Brandon Cooks. What are you do? What's your thought process with Brandon Cooks?
Well, if I have Brandon Cooks, I'm holding him. I don't think you need to be getting rid of him yet. I also think that the way the Cowboys have for lack of a better term, fumbled this offseason, it just felt like he didn't know what all in meant, right? Like going out and signing Royce Freeman is all in. Like that's not how I define it.
Splash.
Yeah, like, whew, okay. That being said, they do need running backs. They have some offensive line issues, I believe. They have some defensive needs. I think there's way too many needs for them to really risk getting a receiver that's going to threaten Brandon Cooks in any potential, like any big way, I guess. I do think they draft a receiver, but it's probably like a fourth rounder, and he ends up being a good slot receiver. Someone like, like a role player, like a special teamer, that kind of thing, who makes the roster, but he's not really a threat to Brandon Cooks' fantasy production. So if anything, I might be buying Brandon Cooks, but most of the time, people that are managing Brandon Cooks right now aren't willing to really give him up because they're probably thinking the same thing I am. They're like, I think he's going to be fine. So his price might be higher than the others, which is what makes him a hold.
Yeah, I'm with you. Well, real quick, because I had it on the sheet and while we're talking about it. So you think Jake Ferguson probably safe too then?
I do. I think Jake Ferguson's pretty good. I think he showed enough last year. Again, as the tight end person, I tend to defer to you and the smarter people than myself. But I liked what I saw from Jake Ferguson. I think that he's probably the number 2 or 3 target getter on that team as it stands right now. And Cooks is the other one, right? Obviously, CD is going to get his, and whoever they get at running back is going to get some. But I'm still looking at Musgrave as like a tight end 12 to 15 kind of player with a higher upside in the tight end 5 range. So I'm fine taking somebody like that. But I don't think that really hurts Cooks as much as it might sound like it does, because I think Dak will figure it out, and I think Cook still has that talent. So we'll see. But yeah, I'm not terribly worried.
Jake Ferguson he's fine. He's exactly fine. If the targets are there, then great. But I'm looking to move him just because I'm worried that at some point they do add somebody, and he's just not somebody that commands a lot of targets. And he's not somebody that can do a lot with not very many targets. He's not particularly fast, right?
Yep.
Let's hit a couple last wide receivers real quick. I'm looking at guys like Jamison Williams, because Hal wanted to talk about the Lions here, and also Rashad Bateman. So these guys are currently, we can't even slot them in as a second target on the team. They're already kind of third. Are you worried that that they could potentially get pushed to fourth here in this draft, or do you think that these teams probably are going to look elsewhere in the draft?
I think that both of these teams have other needs ahead of them. Bateman is the one, I guess, that scares me of the most of the two. Like he's the one that's probably got the most downside in a sense. Like he's got the lowest floor out of all of these we talked about, really, because Bateman might just be one of those names we never hear from again, kind of like in N'Keal Harry a couple years ago, right, where he was on rosters, but then it's like, oh, why? What are we doing here? The Jamison Williams situation is a little bit funky to me because of the injury history and the way that team is built for win now, much like the Ravens, to be honest. But Jamison Williams is really looking at it like he needs to get it together. And there was a lot of draft capital spent there. And I just feel like if it's not this year, it may not ever happen.
Right.
So I think he's a year younger than Bateman, if I'm not mistaken, maybe even 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
But the point I'm getting at there is because of that the youth and the ability for him to kind of write that first year off due to injury makes me feel like he's got a little bit longer leash. But both of these guys, you're entirely right. Both of these guys are wide receiver or third target options. If you count Andrews and Laporta, they're third target options that could be fourth. I agree with you. So I'm probably selling them depending on the situation. But again, I'm not just selling to sell, and I'm probably more willing to acquire if the price gets low enough. Like if I'm in a league where somebody puts out one of those trade baits, any fourth for these guys, I'll send a fourth. Why not? Let's risk. Fourth round picks are very low hit rate anyway. These guys are very low hit rate. You're not losing anything, and you're taking some of that upside with someone I don't mind that. So it kind of depends. But yeah, I'm not necessarily in on either.
Yeah, the place to take advantage of that, honestly, is right now is best ball, because those guys are both guys that can hit home runs, right? And if you don't think this team drafts, because they're not drafting a tight end, right? So if you don't think this team, you never know with the Ravens. But if you don't think that the teams draft a wide receiver, then go out and get set up with best ball and draft these guys, and then you get the home runs and all those good plays without the bad plays, because Jameis Williams is capable of it. We saw him with the carries. Rashad Bateman's capable of it. And we actually at Fantasy Alarm have a best ball guide dropping this week. Yep. All my rankings in both a grid with tiers and a top 240, a bunch of targets, sleepers, busts. That's all out now. You can go to fantasyalarm.com. It might be out today. I just got to check with the schedule. Or if you're an all pro member, you can go get set up at fantasyalarm.com/win. 40% off the annual. You get all the guys. That's the beautiful thing about being an actual member, is that when we do the MLB cheat sheet, we do the best ball guide, we do the NFL draft guide. We have all these guides that you can buy standalone. But if you're a member, you just get those all. And honestly, like, because I use the cheat sheet myself, all of them. I use the hockey one, I use all of them. Like, if you're going to buy all those, it's like $20 here, 25 there. You end up spending over $100. So you might as well just get set up at 40% off of the annual. You get all the guides, all the articles. You get in the Discord, all that. So go get set up now. Again, 40% off for the year. And this covers you, right? You think about where we are in hockey, where we are in basketball, where we are in baseball. It covers you all year round, all of football, all of baseball, all of hockey, and through your baseball draft for next year. So go get set up now at fantasyalarm.com/win, baby. All right, let's hit some running backs and then we'll hit tight end. Running back number 1. This one I think is very interesting in terms of upside and floor based on what they do, and that's Mr. Gus Edwards, right? Jim Harbaugh wants to pound the rock. That Gus Edwards has played with Greg Roman in the past with the Ravens.
Yep.
On the flip side, could draft a running back. What's the danger zone with Mr. Gus here? 1 to 10.
So for me, again, I go back to kind of what I said about Brissett, right? Where it's like, I would not be shocked at all if the Chargers reach for Corum in the second, or, go get somebody that Harbaugh likes from Michigan. He was at Michigan way too many years. I just feel like that's going to happen. And with the way Greg Roman runs the offense, as we saw in Baltimore, like, I think that they are drafting a running back. I'm willing to say almost definitively. But I'm not going to say that running back is going to supplant Gus Bus. I think the bus traveled all the way across the U.S. on this. Right. He went to where Roman was. Roman wanted him. I'm sure that was a discussion that was had. I think Gus is the guy this year, and they have a 1A, 1B type situation with whoever they draft. So I'm still fine with Gus as being my RB2 in Dynasty, and even as a flex, if that is the case. I actually had a guy where he was trying to add my Gus Edwards to a trade as a throw-in, and I'm like, Gus is no throw-in, my friend. Like, no, he's a serious starter for me in this league, right? And he was trying to pitch me that whole thing, like, well, they're going to draft a running back, and you're not going to. I'm like, dude, I'm not buying it. Even if they do, I think Gus is the guy. So when it comes to, am I scared? I guess when it comes to running backs, I'm really never and always scared, if that makes sense. Like, there's so much variability. So for me, I'd probably put it at like a 6. But that doesn't mean that I'm not worried about starting it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I'm with you. I just think that the range of outcomes isn't high. Right?
Yes.
Like, he's not going to get benched, but he's also not going to be a starter. They had a million chances to give this guy the keys to the car in Baltimore, and they always rotated him. So I think that's it. But I think that in the deeper leagues, this is a guy that you can safely during a bye week. Like, he's one of those guys where it's like bye week, and I'm desperate. I feel comfortable throwing Gus in there. Like, you just throw him in there, and you're just like, all right. Like, he could score a touchdown at any given time. He's 240 pounds, and now at least he's not playing with Lamar Jackson. Maybe he will get a little more goal line work.
Well, and the team has other needs. Like, they need a running back, but they need a receiver. They need a tight end. They need some defense. Like, they have all these other things going on. So, yeah, I don't think it's not like the one we're jumping into next for a segue, which is the very obvious need for the Cowboys, which is running back.
Honestly, I'm skipping over the Cowboys just because I think we talked about it with the Royce Freeman in the beginning part that we think they're going to take a guy. I want to throw 3 names that you hear, and I want you to rank them in order of how scared you are for them. There are 3 teams right now in the NFL that only have 3 running backs under contract. And to put it in perspective, the Cowboys, now that they've added Royce Freeman, technically have 5 running backs.
Right.
These teams only have 3. The Rams, the Jaguars, and the Bills. So in terms of how scared you are for these guys, how would you rank Kyren Williams, Travis Etienne, and James Cook? Which one's deepest in the danger zone?
Yeah, I was going to say, I think the most dangerous for me, honestly, is probably Kyren Williams. I just feel like the Rams have a first-round pick for the first time in a while, right? Like, they haven't had a first-rounder in a while. I think the Rams have Puka, obviously, Cooper Kupp. Like, they've got the receivers. They've got Stafford. They've got Higbee. Like, they're kind of locked in. They have other line needs and defense and things like that. But I wouldn't be shocked if they go running back in the third round, and that ends up damaging Kyron Williams in the most, I guess. I guess the biggest delta from what he could be. So Kyron's probably the one I'm the most scared about. Travis Etienne, I'm a little scared of, and I think these kind of go in order in a way, I guess. But Etienne, I'm a little nervous of, but I wouldn't say that I'm scared. And then Cook, I just feel like the way the Bills are lining themselves up to go into this full rebuild, I don't see any world where they don't just lean heavily on James Cook this year and just kind of ride him until the wheels fall off, to use an old analogy, right? Like, so for me, Cook is, I'm least scared of Cook. I'm probably like a 3 for Cook on the danger zone. Etienne's probably a 4, and Williams is probably a 6. And those are kind of more on vibes and kind of reading the tea leaves. So, it's just more about how risk tolerant are you, what your roster look like. I've been trying to acquire Kyron Williams because his ceiling is huge. I mean, there's obviously a world where the Rams don't draft anyone and they just roll in with a really light zone, and Kyron's the 1A and running back 3. So I just think he's got the highest upside of the 3, but he's also got the lowest floor. So the risk is definitely there.
Yeah, and I will say that, I have him ranked Kyron, and then I'm worried about James Cook a little bit, that they might bring in a bruiser back because they've been trying to find one for years.
Yep. The fact that they haven't found one is what makes me less worried, right? Like, they just haven't figured it out.
If they draft Braylon Allen, that would be like a nightmare, I think.
Oof, yeah.
You have 2 Allens and a Cook. Too many Allens and Cooks in the kitchen if that happens. But I will say, Kyron Williams, here's one thing we need to wrap our head around, is that teams, when they hit sometimes on these late round players, and when I say hit, they don't necessarily immediately think like, oh, we found a star late. In their minds, they might say, wow, our run game's really good, right? Like, we are good at running the football.
Imagine if we had a better
running back. And they did it to Michael Carter, and they did it to Tyler Algier, and they did it to Philip Lindsay, and they did it to Dameon Pierce, where they said,
right? Yeah.
Yeah, they took James Robinson. They took these guys in the 4th and 5th and 6th rounds, and they said, wow. They didn't turn around and say, this guy's really good. They said, we're really good. And just imagine how good we would be if we had Breece Hall or if we had Bijan Robinson. So just be very careful with that. Teams at times will do that. And sometimes the guy, it just turns out to be really good, right? It turns out to be the guy. Like, we saw a team do this exact thing with Chris Carson. And they had Chris Carson, and they drafted Rashad Penny in the 1st round, and Chris Carson won the job. And it turns out, oh, wait a second, we did actually hit on the guy late, and we did have the guy. So, it doesn't necessarily mean that's the case, but yeah. And Hal, I see Hal in the chat. Rico Dowdle is an immediate sell. Absolutely.
Yeah. I would think so. Sell him now before his value tanks further. I'm with you.
Yeah. I want to ask you about 2 more running backs real quick. Just again, I'll throw them in the same boat, just like we did. Rashad White and James Conner. Right now, the only show in town for both teams. The concern, of course, is that they weren't super efficient. So with these guys, how would you rank them? What are you doing with those 2 players?
Those are both buys for me. I think they're 2 guys that are flying under the radar. And I think that, again, the way that the teams are set up with their picks, I don't think either one of them is really in a total jeopardy type position. I mean, James Conner and Rashad White, even though he's younger, they're both probably only going to be good for this year. But again, if I'm playing Dynasty and I've got running backs on my roster, I'm really only looking ahead to 1 year or so on running backs anyway. The position is just too volatile with tight end or with injuries and things like that. Like, there's too many different ways that it can go. And I don't like planning ahead on a running back, like a Jonathan Taylor for 5 years, Najee Harris for 5 years, even Bijan for 5 years. Like, it's too risky for me. But I do think what White and Connor both are probably the guy for sure this year. And I think that to me is very enticing, because a lot of people are looking at other names, like the ones we mentioned and the rookies and all this, that these guys are getting overlooked. And people are saying, James Conner's getting older. He's been injury. I kind of went out. I'll take a second. I'll gladly give a second for either of these guys. Put him in my roster, put him in my lineup every week and not have to worry about it. I'm sold.
I tell you that's the thing with James Conner in Dynasty that people forget, is that he's been hurt every single year. But in Dynasty, you have deep rosters, man. If you're competing to win, then you have a good team. So what I do with injury-prone guys like Keenan Allen and James Conner is I start them, and then I get all the fantasy points. And when they get hurt or they go on bye week, then I put in another star for my awesome team that's trying to compete. And if my team isn't good now and I have no shot at winning, then I sell those guys because James Conner's old and Keenan Allen's old, and somebody else can utilize them. But if I'm winning now, I'll collect all the injury-prone guys. I don't care, and I'll start them when they're healthy. And when they're not healthy, I will start someone else. right?
Yeah, and
And
running
that's
backs kind of need to be changing the guard all the time anyway. Like there's so many players throughout the year. Again, if you play Dynasty for more than a couple years, you know that this is true. I don't even have the names. There's so many random names in Week 13 waiver wire articles for running backs. You know what I mean? Like it just happens all the time. So yeah, I'm right there with you.
I'm gonna hit you real quick. We're gonna finish tight end really quick, rapid fire, and I'm gonna grade you on your answers here.
No
It's
pressure.
gonna be one word answers for each of them. All right. Do the Chargers draft a tight end?
Yes.
Correct. Do the Panthers draft a tight end?
I'm gonna know.
False. I think they do.
Okay. Okay.
But so would you? Do you have any interest in Tommy Tremble if they don't? This is a sell.
If they don't, I would. Yeah, but if they do, of course, then I probably want the rookie. Like
Also
like
wrong. Also wrong.
Oh, damn.
We don't want any Tommy Tremble.
Well,
All
I'm
right.
saying more like if they don't, I'll put him on my bench. I don't know. Come on.
Sell them immediately. If they don't draft tight end, sell Tommy Tremble immediately. Tommy Tremble is a hybrid fullback. He is Ethan Carter. He's Ethan Carter. That's who that is. Get him out. Because he hurdles, because he has a rushing touchdown, he hurdled somebody one time. There are people that are interested in Tommy Tremble, and he has a fun name. Anyone in Notre Dame, like all the perfect conditions to sell a player to some idiot. Sell Tommy Tremble.
Well, that's partially why I'm not going to buy him, but I'm saying I'm fine with him until somebody wants him. That's
you will hold him. Yeah, add him off waivers and sell him. All right. Now we're getting into the buy or sell. Mike Gesicki, buy or sell?
Buy, for sure.
Correct. Greg Dulcich, buy or sell?
I'm buying because his price is so low. Yeah.
Darren Waller, buy or sell?
Sell. I'll take anything at this point. Get me out of that headache.
So you're probably right, but I'm hanging on. I
don't blame you, and I'm fine with that logic. I'm fine with that logic.
Jelani Woods, buy or sell?
Do I even have to answer? I feel like this is just now we're getting into the depths. I feel like the Colts take a tight end this draft, so I'm probably selling Woods. Yeah.
No, it's right. It's right. They too much of a rotation risk.
Yeah.
Jonnu Smith, buy or sell?
I hate to say it, but I'm buying just because the name still matters. I don't know. I don't really want to buy him, but I don't really feel like you can get anything for him, so I'd probably rather buy him.
In tight end premium or best ball, then I will accept that. But if it's a typical league where you start one tight end, he still needs an injury.
You can do a lot better.
Waddle Tyreek Hill, yeah. But no, I'm with you. I just think sell because he was worth like nothing, and the fact that you get anything for him, do it. Hal wants to know in the chat: Lucas Kroll, buy or sell? Kroll, Warrior King. Always a buy on the Warrior King.
Just because he's so cheap and nobody even knows who he is, right?
That's right. Yeah, Lucas Kroll, buy. Stone Smart, buy. A couple last ones. Tyler Conklin, buy or sell?
I'm probably selling. I just don't have any need for Conklin.
Never Tyler Conklin. Juwan Johnson, buy or sell?
You know what? I think that whole thing was a phantom. I'm selling.
I think you might have to sell too. And I was a guy that was big on Juwan Johnson. All right, last one. And then I want to know what you got going on. I want you to tell everybody what's going on. Zach Ertz right now, buy or sell?
If he's on waivers, I'm adding him to my bench, depending on where he's going. I don't think you need to pay much for him, but I'm fine holding that. His talent could blow up, so buy.
I love it, dude. I love it. I'm with you on that, man. Cliff Kingsbury was feeding this man 6.5 targets a game. You know what? He could add a little bit of value.
I think he's got some of the tank.
Jeremy Rucker, 100% sell. I would rather have, if I'm taking stabs on like deep Jets depth guys, give me some athleticism. Give me Kenny Yeboah or like who's floating around over there.
Where's CJ Uzoma right now?
Zach Davidson.
Is he still in New York?
No Uzoma. He's like the man. He's like the. I would love having a beer with CJ Uzoma, but I'm done with him for fantasy.
Former Bengals player.
Kenny Yeboah, Zach Davidson. Go a little deeper and crazier with your Jets today. All right, that's it for us, man. Tell everybody what you got going on, man. What you got coming up, and thank you for joining us. You're the best.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at Andrew Hall FF. You can, or X, whatever we're calling it. Andrew Hall FF is my handle there, and on Instagram if it ever dies. I'm still writing for Fantasy Pros. I got an article I'm going to grind out right after this, talking about QB trade targets and who we should be trying to acquire. And I'm taking a lot of what you said to heart about Brissett too. I think that might be a good one for me. But other than that, still on the Dynasty Junkies podcast. Every other Thursday, we're rotating hosts. I'll be on there this week, actually, with Scott. So looking forward to that with the one and only David Zock talking rookies, preparing for rookie drafts. We're in the throes of rookie season right now. So anybody who does Dynasty content, this is kind of like the biggest calm before the storm there is. Because as soon as rookies hit and landing spots get decided and draft capital and all this, like now everything becomes real. Drafts start kicking off, and it's got fishbowl, and we're rolling into the season. So glad to have you. Glad to be here, I should say. Glad to be had. And thanks so much.
Yeah, you usually have me on yours. I think that's why
Exactly. You're coming up, I'm sure.
I know I am. So yeah, get me in the rotation. So everyone go follow him on Twitter at Andrew Hall FF. If you come to the Fantasy Football Expo, find the two of us.
Yes.
We're the most welcoming. We're going to be doing plenty of hanging out there. So come check it out. Thank everybody for hanging out in the chat. Thank you to Matt Deutsch behind the glass. We are out of here. We'll see you guys on Friday.